So just continuing the introduction given by Raki. So my name is Ravi, and I have around 11 years of experience in corporate. 11 years of experience in corporate, and the last 4 to 5 years have been in product management. Prior to that, I was a data analyst, I was a business analyst, and I was also a data warehouse consultant. So my experience spans across different geographies: India, Singapore, Europe so far. And I got an opportunity to work in different kinds of organizations like service based, product based. And here I am today to share a few learnings and discuss the role of Agile in product development framework. So, if we can get started, is everyone here? I think so.
Yeah.
So,
We can have the question QA round in the end. So
yeah,
I just request everyone to please keep posting your questions on the chat box.
yeah. So,
Yeah.
yes, so the session today will be a very interactive session, and this will be a discussion around the role of Agile in product development and what sort of Agile based questions you can expect in interviews whenever you're attending PM interviews, whether it is B2B or B2C or startups or big corporations, and also the common practices that engineers and product managers follow in Agile development, and also the metrics, the common metrics that we measure as part of Agile product development. So these will be covered, and also we can quickly discuss few common scenarios around interviews as well. So to get started, uh, Agile. Sorry, is anyone speaking? Okay, I got some noise. Yeah. So let's quickly get started. So, like, what is Agile PM methodology? It is basically an iterative approach to managing software development projects, and it focuses on continuous releases and incorporating customer feedback with every iteration. And Scrum and Kanban are few or two of the most popular Agile methodologies, and Jira is one tool or software that supports both. So we'll quickly cover the practices that are usually followed in Scrum, which is more popular, and when to use what, which is not very important, but we'll just touch upon that. So Scrum essentially is about dividing your entire development into sprints. Typically, sprints have a duration of 2 weeks, and at the end of every sprint, there is some review that is done, and at the end of every sprint there is certain retro meetings that are done. So the common practices in Scrum are sprint planning, which is what sort of development should happen in the next 2 weeks, and the daily stand-ups, which is the tracking of the progress on a regular basis, what the team is doing and what are the blockers, and sprint review, which is reviewing the sprint, let's say after a couple of weeks, whenever the sprint ends, what has been achieved, what are the common metrics, and what are the spillovers to the next sprint, what are the backlogs. And then there is sprint retrospective, which is more about getting or gathering feedback from different participants, engineers and QA, as to what went well, what can be improved in the process. So these are certain common processes. And let's say from an interview perspective, Agile is actually a big ocean, and it's something that a lot of Scrum masters and product owners and a lot of program managers specialize on. They keep doing a lot of certification. So it is a huge philosophy, and there's a lot of theoretical concepts that are there. But as a PM, are we expected to know all of that? Definitely no. The two most common questions that come up during the interview processes are, have you worked in an agile environment before? And which is a very generic question for which the answer will be either a yes or no. In most of the cases, yes. And that will be followed by a follow-up question like, what are the common agile practices that you have followed? And that can be answered by mentioning about the processes that you follow in your current organization. So the point to remember here is agile practices vary from organization to organization and sometimes project to project. Sometimes people follow Scrum, sometimes people follow Kanban. So the basic difference between Scrum and Kanban, I mentioned about Kanban earlier. Here is Kanban is more like a continuous flow where we don't really break down the work into 2 week sprints. It is more about uh, having a continuous flow of tasks and maintaining the status of each task, like what are the to do tasks, what are the in progress tasks, and what are the done tasks. And sprint is more about breaking down into 2 weeks and having a very specific goal for every sprint. So it's never a choice between whether we should do Scrum or whether we should do Kanban. It's always the preference of the team. And sometimes you can do both also, depending on the nature of the project and the nature of specific aspects of the project. So coming back to the interview question. So if we were to face a question like what are the common agile practices, we can actually answer based on the practices we follow in our organization, and we can cover certain jargons like sprint reviews or daily stand-ups or how we handle sprint demos, etc., etc. The main thing that interviewers look for in this discussion is whether the candidate is aware of agile development and whether he's aware of the basic frameworks or basic practices that are followed. That is the main aspect. It's not about how theoretical or how process oriented the PM is. Now, once this level of familiarity is established with the interviewer, right, where we discuss about how work is distributed, then usually it can be about how do you prioritize the backlog, you know, or how do you actually decide the items for every sprint, because sprint is nothing but the combination of the tasks we want to do for the next 2 weeks, right? So how do you decide the task to be done for the next 2 weeks? How do you do the prioritization? So this is a more product manager specific question, because prioritization is usually done based on various frameworks. So we can answer using a specific framework like reach, impact, confidence, or effort. So we discussed with the engineering manager about the effort it takes for every story or every task that is in the sprint, and then we assign some points to every task which we call as story points. These story points are nothing but the effort it takes to complete every task, usually based on the complexity of the task, based on the effort it takes. And then we also look at whether it is a high priority item. Like high priority item depends on the reach or the impact. Is it going to affect too many stakeholders, or is it something that will definitely have an immediate impact on certain KPIs? So based on this, we do some prioritization and we define or freeze the sprint. So this response basically establishes the fact that okay, there is a clear backlog grooming that is done at the end of every sprint, and we are always looking at prioritization with a specific framework in mind or with a specific mental model in mind, which is the RICE model, for example, that I had mentioned. So this is one more scenario which again establishes to the interviewer that there is a there is a logical framework that we follow. Now, uh, getting back to where agile comes into the picture, like in the entire product development framework, right? I think that is also important to be covered. So typically every product has a life cycle, and you might be aware of it. So I'll cover it in a certain format. I call it the 4D format. So there is discover, there is define, there is design, and then there is deliver. So typically, whenever we are building a new product, we first look at discovering the problems, like identifying the opportunities. So typically the problem discovery is done by conducting user interviews and preparing questionnaires. So you send out surveys, you maybe physically meet people, or you do phone interviews, and then you talk to various people in the organization. You look at the problems that are lying around. Basically, this is about collating the different problem areas that are there, which is problem discovery. Now, based on problem discovery, a PM typically defines certain problems that needs to be solved. Let's not get into too much of detail here because it becomes a different topic altogether. But the point to be focused here is the next step becomes defining the problem statement. Now, defining the problem statement is basically deciding what to solve. Once we arrive at a list of problems, deciding what to solve based on organizational priorities, based on the team's priorities, and based on the effort involved, and based on what is the most important problem to be solved, which is again subject to the needs of the organization, right? Now, once the definition is or defining the problem statement phase is done, then comes the phase where we come up with product solution documents or product requirement documents, where we come up with high level mockups, we come up with maybe Figma designs or balsamic designs as to what the user flow should be, define a basic customer journey, come up with user stories, come up with what and why, basically what are we building and why are we building it, maybe do some competition benchmarking if required, to do some analysis with competitors, and then we freeze the PRD basically by going for a review with a head of product or other PMs. Now comes the delivery phase. Once this design is done, so in the 4Ds, discovery, define, design, and now delivery, which is where your development team will basically pick up the PRD and then start development. So this is exactly where Agile or any other model will come into picture during the delivery phase. And this is when engineering manager and product manager will look at the user stories which are there in the PRD, will look at the markups, and will define or will divide the project into, let's say, 4 to 5 sprints. Let's say we are building a UI to track data quality, or let's say we are building a UI to um, extract data from some source or integrating from Amazon S3. So in this case, let's say there are 4 to 5 screens and there are like 15 to 20 user stories that are there in the PRD. Now, depending on the prioritization, what needs to be picked up, what needs to be done in the first sprint, what needs to be done in the second sprint, what needs to be done in the third sprint, roughly how many sprints are required for the entire delivery of the project. So this calculation or this estimates are done by both engineering manager and the product manager. And that is when they actually divide into specific number of sprints, and it is communicated to the business that, okay, we have committed to a timeline of 3 months. Now, this 3 months will have around 8 sprints or 8 to 10 sprints. And in every sprint, what needs to be done depends on what story points you assign to every user story. Now, let's cover a bit of story points here because I mentioned that. So, story points is something which is a number that you assign to every story you want to build, which is like you can follow Fibonacci series, for example, where every number is the sum of the previous two numbers. So 1, 2, 3, 5, etc. And you can follow any other pattern also. But the essence here is, let's say if I'm building a specific feature in a specific screen, right? So what is the complexity of building this? Am I assigning 1 to this, or am I assigning a score of 3 to this? Am I assigning a score of 5 to this? It is based on the effort required, and it is based on the dependencies with other teams also. So once we decide story points, so typically in a sprint we try to close at least 15 to 20 story points. For example, we pick up 3 to 4 tasks where the story points add up to around 15 or 16, and then we try to achieve those items in the sprint. It's not a hard and fast rule. It depends on team to team. So this is the typical delivery process, and this is where Agile comes into the picture. Now, in a real world scenario, what exactly happens at the end of every sprint? You can measure how many tasks you have achieved. Most of the cases, you won't achieve everything that you have decided to achieve. So sometimes there are spillovers to the next sprint. Now, this is where you do a quick review in terms of uh, measuring the progress of the sprint, and also coming up with certain metrics. Now, these metrics always help us to measure the success of the sprint. For example, velocity of the sprint. Now, velocity of the sprint is a very simple metric. It's nothing but the number of story points we finished in a sprint. It could be like maybe 10 story points that could sum up, or that could come to be like 2 to 3 tasks, right? Now, are we increasing the velocity in every sprint? Now, that definitely measures the progress of the sprints, right? If I finish 10 story points now, am I in a position to finish maybe 12 or 13 story points? So once we track the velocity of every sprint, we will have a rough estimate of how well we are utilizing the capacity of the team. Is the capacity overutilized, or are we overcommitting something, or are we undercommitting, etc., etc. So this is something that will help. So I'll take a quick pause over here. I've been talking in a certain flow, and it looks like there are okay. Yeah. So whiteboard or PPT. So this currently, okay. So currently hierarchy. So I'm not using. Yeah. Okay. Got it. Sure. Okay. I'll take a quick pause over here. I was going in a certain flow. So do you have any specific questions so far? It can be anything generic also around this.
Yeah, yeah, Ravi.
Yeah.
Hi,
Yeah.
Ashwarya this side.
Yeah.
So I have one question
Mm,
that how can we use this agile methodology in this data projects, like which are
mm,
specific data and tables and all? Because like breaking those things into stories and it's very difficult for it to do and then complete those complete tables and everything validation. So how
mm.
can we use that thing over the data part?
Understand. So even in data projects or any technical project, as a matter of fact. So let's take a very specific example here, right? So let's say in a data project, uh, we need to build maybe 7 8 pipelines, or we need to build 4 or 5 reports
Yeah.
which are requested by the business, right? Or we need to build dashboards. Are you referring to these kind of projects?
Correct, correct. Because say sprints are basically like if we refer to 2 weeks, like
Mm,
10 to 13 days, right? And
mm,
like it's not possible to have everything over those 10 to 13 days because building a pipeline, everything is a very bigger chunk.
mm,
And they cannot be like completed in a sprint instead of like developing a feature or a part of it. It's very
mm.
much we can put into our story points and then develop those features going through stories.
Yeah.
But developing those tables and populating those data is not a sprint task. So how we go for that?
That's a very valid scenario. So that is why when we are not talking about specific product development, uh, having a sprint is not a hard and fast rule, right? So it's not like a rigid rule where every project should be done in a sprint model. For example, the operational work that we have, building a pipeline is an operational task, or building 2 3 reports is an operational task, right? That
Mm-hmm.
need not be when the whole project is very operational.
Yeah.
We need not follow a hard and fast sprint rule, but we can incorporate certain practices. For example, we can still follow an agile methodology where we have daily stand-ups, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, so in daily stand-ups, we can actually discuss, let's say we are building a pipeline, right? We can actually discuss the progress of that. We can actually discuss blockers. We can actually discuss maybe dependencies on some other team, or any data issues we have encountered. So that is one practice we can encounter. Now,
Mm-hmm.
the other thing is we can create specific tickets. So for example, building a pipeline itself can be a ticket, right? And
Right.
you can create a ticket in Jira, and
Mm-hmm.
let's say your entire team has a bunch of 10 tickets. So you
Mm-hmm.
have 3 tickets where you're building a pipeline, you're building a report, and someone else has another bunch of tickets where they are doing QA for the pipeline or writing SQL queries, right?
Right. Right.
So let's say your entire project has maybe 10 tickets. Project as in your entire team for the timing
Mm-hmm.
has 10 tickets, right? So here we can follow a Kanban model where
Okay.
in Jira you have a Kanban board,
Mm-hmm.
and
Right.
yeah, so it's more about what tickets are to do, what tickets
Right.
are in progress,
In
what
progress.
what tickets are maybe blocked by someone else, and
Mm-hmm.
what tickets are done, right?
Okay.
So
Mm-hmm.
we can have this sort of a board which has visibility to the entire team, right? So for example, let's say I am part of your team and I see the Kanban board. I have a quick visibility of, okay, this person Aishwarya is working on this pipeline. So it was maybe to do 4 days back. Now it has been moved to in progress, right? And
Mm-hmm.
now maybe 2 days later it will be done. So every stand up on a regular
Mm-hmm.
basis, we can review the board, right? And this is, let's say, another informal way of agile where we are not exactly having deliverables for every 2 weeks, but
Right.
we are measuring the progress every day. Now what is the benefit of this? One is team engagement. Even though it's operational work, this creates some
Okay.
sort of accountability, right? So does this answer uh, the majority of your question?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
it does
And
works, but like then how are we going to calculate the spillovers? Like in Agile, we have this, okay, this will move to next sprint with this particular story points or
yeah,
something. But here we do not give any story points, right?
yeah.
Because we don't have
So
stories.
understand. So I've been through a similar scenario when I was a data analyst and also when I was a data
Yeah,
PM. So in that
right.
case, the spillovers. So yeah, because we do not have a specific 2 week sprint, right? We would not have
Mm-hmm.
a specific concept of a spillover. It will be more like a
Mm-hmm.
continuous flow. However,
Okay.
what I did or what we can do is,
Mm-hmm.
um, there are certain things that we can measure in this scenario, right? What is the speed or average resolution time of a ticket? We can
Okay.
measure certain metrics, and these metrics in this scenario, like in the scenario that you mentioned, right? uh,
Mm-hmm.
we can we can actually measure this maybe every 2 weeks or every month also. Let's say
Okay.
we can do January versus February versus March.
Mm-hmm.
So this can be like in Jira. There is an opportunity for
Right.
you to create simple reports, right?
Yeah.
So there, yeah, so you can do a quick average resolution time for every ticket, maybe on a month on month basis. So let's say in October, you have closed maybe 10 tickets, or the entire team has closed 20 tickets in October, right? So
Right.
average resolution time for every ticket maybe in October is 5 days, right? Maybe when you measure the same metric in November, the average
Mm-hmm.
resolution time is maybe 7 days, right? So when you see the graph, you'll be like in a position to at least do some quick post-mortem. Hey, it was average 5 days earlier, now it is 7 days now, or maybe next month it has come down to 3 days. So a quick metric here can be, at least for the sake of velocity of the team, or to measure the productivity of the team, am I making sure that the average resolution time is reducing or it is remaining the same, you know and
But still,
yeah.
if I go, so sorry to correct. So if you go for the complexity of a particular ticket or something, right? So in the
Hmm.
start of any of this data pipeline thing, the complexity remains very high. But as
Yes,
the gradually it goes to like goes to completion, the complexity reduces, right? So
correct.
what will like if we check for the like previous 1 month or 2 months, what if like the complexity was high for last 2 months and the complexity is not that high for these suppose we are just taking small tables in this particular
Hmm.
month, and
Correct.
what we did is started with very parent tables at very of the start of the sprint from the previous 2 months. So like how we're going to compare in that way?
Understand. So complexity is something we would not change on a regular basis. So let's say to build a pipeline, if it takes 1 month, right? And you
Mhm.
have assigned the complexity as maybe 5 points at the
Yeah.
beginning of the task, right? So what you're
Mhm.
saying is, let's say at the end of 3 weeks, because there's only little amount of work left, the complexity will
Right.
reduce. Am I right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right, right, right,
So yeah. So complexity is something which is very task. I mean, not task based. How do I put it? Complexity is something which is very user story based. For example,
right.
build a pipeline to get data from S3 into the data lake, or get data from some other source into S3. Let's say if this is the task, right? If you assign a complexity of a certain number, throughout the completion of that, the complexity will remain the same. All right.
Right,
It's just that in a more verbal way during the stand up, you can, or during the regular sessions or team meetings, you can just mention to uh, your PMs or EMs that, okay, this task will take another 1 week, right? So my bandwidth or something will free up after a week or two. So
right.
we need not really keep changing the complexity or story points. Yeah.
Okay, okay, yes.
So,
But
so
so
that is,
just wanted
yeah.
to know, like, I'm curious,
Yeah.
like we generally we used to story points these product things to be like 3 or 5, like making it a
Yes.
2 or making it 3 or making it a 5. But
Yeah.
so just wanted to know, like in data also it goes like that itself, like 2, 3, 5, or we go for this other numbers as like 10 or something in this Fibonacci series.
Well, there are several methods, right? And there is a linear sequence also, which is you can always follow like typical 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 also, right? Or you
Yeah.
can follow Fibonacci sequence also. But the thing is, whichever point system we use, right?
Okay.
The most important questions to ask are whether it is you or anyone who is assigning points,
Hmm.
right? Like, how much time will this work take,
Right,
right?
right,
And is there any risk? For example, there are certain tasks which have certain risk, as in risk can be anything like there's a dependency on some other team to provide you something, right?
right, right,
Which means there is some minimal risk over there, in the sense that if they don't provide whatever you need, your task might get delayed, right?
right,
And there can be the basic, how complex is the work, how much time will this take, what are the technical abilities, like do I have enough technical abilities right now, like for
hmm,
example, you need to build a pipeline maybe in Google Cloud, right? Maybe you're
hmm,
not very familiar with Google Cloud right now, maybe your expertise is in AWS, right?
right,
In that case, maybe the story point will go up, right? Yeah.
right.
So yeah, so these are the main questions. Don't be very rigid about the actual method used in numbering. Yeah.
Got it. Got it. Okay.
You
Yeah.
can use
Thank you,
whichever
Ravi,
number you
for
use. Yeah.
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 Thank you so much.
Okay.
So Dinesh, we have one more question in the chat box
Yeah. Yeah.
from Dinesh.
Question from Dinesh. Do agile practices vary from industry to industry? Can we plan service operations in an agile way? Yes, agile practice definitely vary from industry to industry. Um, for example, like Scrum and Kanban, right? In most of the cases, in a lot of industries, in a lot of manufacturing industries, Kanban is followed. In a lot of software development, Scrum is followed. Having said that, Kanban is also followed in software development, but Kanban itself originated from lean manufacturing. Now, to answer your specific question, uh, let's say in a consulting environment, service operations, right? So, can you be a bit more specific, because consulting can be a broader
Yeah,
term?
yeah, sure,
Yeah,
sure. So,
yeah.
specifically in energy management, sourcing,
Hmm.
or uh, energy opportunities in that sector, and also building SaaS software inside organization for those service operation, like automating some of the operations and data things. So, around that. Uh,
Yeah. So, okay, I understood your question. So let me give a generic answer first and then get to the specific part, right? So the first thing is, like I mentioned before, agile practices vary from organization to organization and sometimes team to team. And sometimes a lot of teams do not follow a strict agile process, but they do have stand-ups. In my experience, when I was in IT services consulting, when I was in Virtusa, we never had sprints, but we had daily stand-ups. We also had like a review meeting every 2 weeks. Now, these are just 2 points that we incorporated from the Scrum model. And we also, yeah, and we also used to have a review or a demo meeting, sorry, demo meeting, where we used to kind of give a quick uh, presentation to certain stakeholders to let them know what we have built or what we have solved in the last 1 month. So it's not necessary that agile is followed in a strict manner in every industry. Now, to get to your specific question, let's say to build something for a SaaS product, am I right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So there, I think it can be tweaked a bit. So first we can define the objective or the goal that needs to be achieved. And this is something the team members can decide amongst themselves, maybe in consultation with the business. So what is my monthly goal and what is my bi-weekly goal? If you don't want to go bi-weekly, maybe you can fix a monthly goal. Now, example of a monthly goal can be like this week, maybe I'll build one user flow, or this week maybe I'll build one specific uh, specific uh, functionality. It could be like adding a button, or it could be like sometimes solving a bug also, right? Now, in your consulting or service operations, solving bugs is also an important part of the day-to-day activities, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So we can actually decide the goal as, I'm going to solve maybe 90% of the bugs which are there right now, and I'm going to build this one functionality in this one screen, right? And then you can break it down to specific tasks which you want to achieve on a 2 weeks basis. That is something that can be done, So let's say if you are building a SaaS product which is used by clients, right? Like there are certain clients you have, and then you are building a product for them. So there'll definitely be a business requirement document, a functional requirement document, which outlines the requirements of what needs to be built, which outlines acceptance criteria, etc., etc., right? So you can always break it down. If we have to do it in an agile way, we can break it down into maybe 3 to 4 specific parts, and then it is usually done that way, where we commit to the client that, hey, to build this entire SaaS model, right, where the user logs in and then we upload a file, or then he performs a certain operation, and then he downloads the data, and then he finishes the flow. This is one example, right? We will probably build one flow in 1 month, and we will build an additional functionality in the next 1 month. So we reduce, or we break down the scope into 2 3 parts, and then we do this agile model. So here we need not be very rigid about the sprint model. We like mentioned before to Aishwarya, we can have the list of tickets. So roughly everything that needs to be developed should always have a bunch of tickets. So if you're using Jira, you can always create like 10 tickets or 15 tickets. Like, what are the entire tasks that the project needs? If there are 15 tasks that the project needs, and if it's a 3 month project, create 15 tickets, assign owners to every ticket, right? And now, whatever tickets you have, let's say you have 5 tickets, right? You give a rough estimate. To do these 5 tickets, maybe I will need 2 months. And then in a stand-up model, you can always talk about the progress of every ticket, and then you can always talk about the dependencies, because there'll be certain tickets where you will have dependencies from other team members as well. That can be discussed in the stand-up. And then you can have like a review every month, where, okay, the entire project has 15 tickets, how many tickets have we finished, and are we on track? If we are not on track, and if we have, let's say, if we have 15 tickets to be finished in 3 months, on an average, maybe we want to do 5 tickets a month, right? So maybe if you have finished only 2 3 tickets, then it's a red alert, or it's a red flag that, okay, something needs to be changed. And then we can tweak around, or maybe we can add more resources, or we can be more clear about the requirements, and then uh, we can improve the process in the next 1 month. So it can be done in a more iterative way, in a consulting, or in a SaaS, or in an operations setup, where we need not always follow a very rigid sprint model. Yeah. Do you have any other question on this, or if there's anything that is unclear, we can go into specific examples?
Yeah, that was good. I have other question also.
Mm,
Like, so
mm.
what are the parameters to define like number of sprints for a particular project delivery, for product
Okay.
delivery? Yeah.
So it's actually a very simple calculation.
Okay.
For example, it always depends on the effort. So just today, I was in a meeting with one of the
Uh,
engineering. Sorry.
sorry to
Yeah.
interrupt. Just one input as well. So I was actually so we will be working on a tool very soon in our team, and I have been in the team, and we will be talking to software guys in next 2 3 weeks.
Yeah.
So I was talking to one like a guy, software guy from our team only, and so and I was having a discussion around the topic of building tool and what we are planning around that as well.
Understand.
So, so what he explained me that the functionality that they will be following will depend upon the amount of effort, but not amount of time to build something.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they will be defining things that how much effort will this take. On the basis of that, they will be assigning a number of sprints to that. So
Yeah.
as I am not familiar to these terms, so I
Yeah.
was having few doubts around it. So can you
Understand.
focus on that?
Understand.
Yeah,
Understand your question. Okay, Srichand has also raised his hand, so let me listen to his question also and address both your questions at once.
sure,
Give
sure.
me a second. So Srichand, yeah, please.
Um, Hi, Ravi. So I have two questions. One is in terms of planning for a 2 week sprint, um, considering software estimation is hard and not all of them that have been broken down to the complexity will stick to that. Some of them you might get some things that will overshadow the rest of the things, right? How do you plan for it? Do you plan so that you have a buffer in 3 sprints? After 3 sprints, you still have some time that you've accounted for as the lead that you're playing, or do you have slack that you've scheduled in your sprint itself? Right. So that's one in terms of that. Second is if you're transitioning an existing development team or a maintenance team to now start work on sprint, um, what are the things that you'll have to look at to ensure that they take the agile process? They might get the fundamentals of okay, we'll have to use this tool, we'll put it, but not necessarily in terms of taking on the agile process or owning
Yeah. Yeah.
things, right? So both
Yeah.
of those things are what I would be great if you answer.
Sure. So I'll answer the earlier question and your question.
Okay.
Yeah. So let me emphasize on this. Agile practices or agile culture is something that needs to be built sometimes. It's not inbuilt in a product team, like you mentioned, or inbuilt in an engineering team, right? There are teams, I mean, even today, despite all these best practices and all that, in a real world scenario, I have worked in like a couple of projects where people do not follow any model, right? Uh, I mean, stand-ups and all, they are just for sake of another meeting, right? Now, to get to your point, right? Let's take a scenario where there is no specific or there's no standard process that is already there with respect to agile. Now, as a PM, this will also become one of our responsibilities where we build a product culture, you know. So product culture is about like the 4D framework I mentioned, right? So typical product culture is basically making the teams more customer centric. Typical product culture is about making sure that your engineers understand why they are doing what they are doing, right? And in most of the cases where a PM, like say you join a startup where there was no precedent to your role, or you join a big organization, so let's say a big organization suddenly decides that, hey, let me get a PM, because that will definitely improve my product development process, right? And let's say you're a first time PM and you didn't have any precedent before. So one of your biggest tasks in the first 6 months to 1 year, and sometimes 1 year, is to establish a product culture. And establishing a product culture means several things. One is writing clear PRDs and basically defining a roadmap, you know, talking to customers first, then coming up with problem statements, then coming up with a roadmap, and then writing PRDs, and then handing over the PRDs to your developers, and then do this entire iteration. And then once something is done, measure the success metrics, maybe by doing user surveys, maybe by doing surveys about NPS, and maybe by uh, doing some basic creating some dashboards where you measure conversion rates or any other metrics, right? Now this is like establishing a product culture. Now in this process, sometimes we will have to establish an agile culture as well. So the best thing to do in a very pragmatic way here is, we should not, in an ideal scenario, it's not a good idea to impose everything right away on the team. Hey, you know what, like I've done this course, or I've worked as a PM in this organization before, so the organization used to have this process, so let me dump this process on you. No, that will not work. In fact, you will face some resistance, right? The best way is to start small. So in case of agile, uh, I think the best way is to start with daily stand-ups. Let's say there is no agile at all. Hey guys, especially because there is all remote work all over, right? Maybe we can have a friendly discussion that, okay, the main purpose of the stand-up is to increase the engagement, because now we are not sitting in one office, so everyone knows what everyone else is doing, and there is some accountability, right? So that people don't slack off, right? Now you can start with stand-ups. Let's say as a PM, when you attend these stand-ups and when you get a sense of what everyone is doing, right, and you will understand in a few weeks where you are able to add value, what kind of questions are being asked in stand-ups. Hey Srichand, this requirement is not clear, can you talk to the customer once, or can you talk to the business analyst once, something like that. Hey Srichand, this acceptance criteria is not clear, can you talk to the QA and define a very clear acceptance criteria, something like that. So once you gather this sort of a the list of questions, right, then you can understand where the pain points are. Like, is my team struggling with lack of a proper PRD, or is my team struggling with lack of proper communication with clients, or lack of proper communication with actual customers, right? And is my team actually struggling with visibility, because sometimes you are building a lot of things, but stakeholders and business do not really know what we are doing, right? And sometimes it is the job of the PM to have these visibility sessions also, like you send out newsletters, you know or you give some demos. So in your case, right, you can start with daily stand-ups. You can start with a newsletter every month. A newsletter every month is, hi everyone, this is so and so, I'm the PM for this team, okay? So I'm sending out this letter just to give you a quick update of what we are doing and how it is impacting. A newsletter again should not be very verbose, because people do not have time to read emails, right? So you can just give a quick visibility of what the team is doing and how it is impacting certain metrics. Maybe it is increasing the revenue, or maybe it is reducing, or it is increasing the reliability of platform. Your metrics better, right? Newsletter can be one way, and then suddenly and then you also get into this model where you track everything in Jira, right? And then as a PM, you look at generally how often are tickets being created and how often are tickets being closed, what is the average resolution time, right? Once you, step by step, once you do this stand up, once you do this newsletters, once you do this tracking everything in Jira, then you can gradually introduce this model where, hey, you know what, now let's do development in a structured way, where we have everything broken down to like a 2 week sprint. And every 2 weeks, let's give a demo to the stakeholders. Every 2 weeks, let's do a review. And every 2 weeks, let's kind of analyze what went well, what didn't go well, blah, blah, blah. So you can gradually arrive at this point, maybe in 6 months, and then again, this should be a very collaborative process. Like you should get your engineering manager on board first, and then sometimes you have to explain the value. And this is where I'd like to emphasize, this is for everyone, right? Now typically when we want to adopt something, whether it is agile or whether it is any other process, we should understand the benefits of it. Like the engineers or the stakeholders should understand the benefits of it, so as a PM, it is our job, or it becomes your job, to tell your engineers that, hey, you know what, the specific benefits of agile is increasing visibility. Because if we do this iterative development every 2 weeks or every 3 weeks, we can go to the stakeholders and tell them this is what we are doing. So it increases visibility. And the other thing is increasing velocity. Now, how can you improve something which you do not measure, right? So when you get to a sprint model, this is how you can advocate. When you get to a sprint model, we can measure the velocity every 2 weeks, and then we can increase the development velocity, and then we can achieve our targets faster, right? So gradually, this is how you ease people into the process. Have I covered the important part of your question? Yeah. So now coming back, okay, let me take one question from Santoshi also. Yeah, Santoshi.
Hi Ravi, this is something generic, not related to
Yeah,
this, not
sure,
related to
sure,
the previous one. So I just
sure.
want to know, after doing PRDs, after create writing scenarios and user stories while planning a sprint, does that ever happen to you that you thought something, you gave a requirement something else and built was something else, and how did you handle that situation? Because I'm a PM now, it's been two
Yeah,
years.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I just want to know the scenario because I faced
Understand.
it recently and I couldn't handle it better. But I'm here
Understand.
to just to know the insights. Yeah.
Understand. Okay. Before this, there is one part of Srishan's question which I did not answer. I think that was about yeah, buffer. Like how do we plan the timelines, right? So Srishan, to answer that, yes, we will always have a buffer. So whenever, let's say if you estimate the sprint timeline to be maybe 2 months, right? So which will be like 4 sprints. So typically we always try to have a 1 week buffer. And again, it's not a hard and fast rule. The essence here is to have a buffer, because sometimes people can go on unexpected leaves, and sometimes things can not work as per the plan, right? So that 1 week buffer is to always do some damage control. This is one practice. We Especially when we are committing a timeline, it's always good to have that 1 week buffer, right? Now the second part of the question is, yes, there will always be a scenario where unexpected ad hoc requests will come up. you know as a PM, we cannot say no to everything, but our job is to say no to most of the things. Again, not as a not as a generic rule. Something has asked something, okay, I'll say no. No, it's about the smooth communication, where we should learn to say no by explaining that, okay, this our engineers are already busy, and then maybe this is something we might not take up in this sprint, but however we will take it up in the next sprint. This is one way of doing it, right? Now of course there'll be some so negotiation becomes one of the most. I was talking to a recruiter the other day, and then he was explaining me that 30% of this role on a day-to-day basis is negotiation with stakeholders, right? And negotiate, and this is for everyone. So negotiation with stakeholders is basically nothing but business keeps asking you everything, to do everything and on a regular basis, and you do this negotiation. And negotiation is not about saying no, it's about saying no right now, so that you can say yes later, right? So this is one way of doing that. And the other thing is, there is also this planning that you need to do, where you'll always have one dedicated on call resource, right? And that is the most ideal way to tackle any unexpected ad hoc requests or bugs. Because if you have a dedicated on call guy, which is usually the practice these days, right, any surprises will be handled by that. And usually in the sprint planning also, let's say when I'm planning a sprint, and let's say you are on call, like Srishant is on call this week, right? In this week or in this sprint, I will not account your effort into the sprint planning, you know so yeah, this is one way of doing it. Now coming back to Santoshi, yeah, Santoshi, that's a very generic question, so if you don't mind, we can discuss later also. However, I'll just give you one specific hack here, right? um, the thing is, okay, there's no hard and fast rule as to what should be done, but sometimes you can reduce the scope. Let's say you have written the PRD and something changes, right? You can always reduce the scope. The most important thing business wants to see is whether there is progress on what has been committed. For example, we have committed like 100%, and then for whatever reason requirements have changed and there is something new that has come up, maybe we can communicate to the business that, hey, in this quarter I can do maybe 70% of this, and why am I not able to do the 30%? It's because something else has come up, or it's because this requirement has changed, right? Or it's because some time has been allocated to refining or changing the requirement based on the new needs, right? And then we can safely, well, there'll be some backlash, but the best way is to communicate to the business right away that I'll only be able to do, or we will only be able to do 70%. And ideally, this should be done in conjunction with your engineering manager. Because if you and your engineering manager are on the same page, and if you're speaking the same language, and if you go to the business together saying that we will be able to commit only 70% of this or some X percentage of this because of whatever reason, and the remaining 30%, depending on the progress we make in this quarter, we'll either pick it up this quarter or we will pick it up next quarter. And if you have a very robust explanation like this, along with the other high priority item you have picked up, for example, if you have picked up something else, right? uh, then that is one way of maybe doing some damage control or setting the right expectations. And what you asked is a very valid question. Actually, in a real world scenario, 70 to 80% of the times we will face this. There will never be a scenario where you write a PRD and as it is, it will go into development. And if you have anything specific around this, like I have handled so many conflicts like this in the past, we can definitely take it up on a more specific question basis later also.
Sure, Ravi. Thank you so much.
Yeah. um okay.
Ravi, I have a quick follow-up.
Yeah, sure.
Is that okay? So, in terms, one is in terms of crunch, is crunch time. Considering if I've kind of moved my team from Kanban to Scrum, and
Yeah.
we've been doing it for over a year, and we have a lot more development work right now rather than just keeping things going. And because these are internal deadlines and it's a product, it's I don't know how to get things closed in certain time. I think culturally that's been a challenge, because uh, do I enforce so that in the sprint itself things close, or if the sprint is over and things don't get closed, there's a spillover and then the next sprint starts, or does the next sprint start right after this is done, right? The second thing is, does the sprint planning for the next one, how do you schedule it? Do you schedule it on day 8 and 9 of the current sprint, or after this? What's your flow, not in the sprint, but the meta work between these things?
Yeah. So let's assume the sprint is ending Wednesday. So typically the way it is done in most of the organizations, like in my experience, and the way I used to do it is, the demo will be on Thursday, and this is assuming that sprint ends Wednesday. The demo will be on Thursday. Demo is about, okay, hey stakeholders, this is what we have done in this sprint, just a quick 3 to 4 slides. And this will be like a team presentation. You will add something, your engineer will add something, your QA guy or someone else will add something, right? Now locking the next sprint is usually done like Monday and Tuesday. So uh, maybe you do some homework the previous Friday. So the previous Friday, typically you and other important deciding guy in the team, you guys get together and you look at the tickets, you look at the backlog, and you look at any new tickets that have been created, right? And you look at the prioritization, like how important it is this, and is this something that needs to be done? And you also look at potential spillovers, right? Because let's say if the sprint is ending Wednesday, on Friday, the previous Friday, you will have an idea of what will be the spillover, right? So So the review meeting, not review meeting, the Friday meeting usually decides what items will go into the Thursday sprint, the sprint that's going to start from Thursday. And based on that, Monday you kind of create a uh, quick list of the sprint tasks for the next sprint, and then you do a review with the team, right? Hey, this is what we are thinking for the next sprint, and you kind of leave it open for comments, maybe in a Slack channel or maybe something else, because if there is any conflict, right, or if there's any back and forth that is going on, you can fix it by Wednesday if you float
Yeah.
it on Monday, right? And then you can assign clear ownership in these 2-3 days also, right? So this is how it is usually done. And the spill, so sprint, this will be a continuous process. One sprint ends Wednesday, the next sprint will start Thursday, right? And if there's if there is any problem in getting stuff done, then see, that's a deeper question, right? Because that can be due to lack of resources, or that can be due to lack of technical expertise, or that can be due to maybe lack of a sense of urgency, you know, because sometimes not everything is urgent, even though we kind of push it to be urgent. It depends on the business need as well, right? It is something that usually gets solved on an iterative basis. And I think the best way for us to create this sense of urgency in the team is to always keep them very close to the business impact of what they are doing, right? And keep them very close to the kind of opportunity cost, or the kind of consequences we would have if we don't finish certain things on time, right? Most of the times it becomes our job, right? Yeah. So this is one way of handling it. Yeah.
Thanks, Ravi.
uh, yes. And there was, I think, one. Yeah, so I didn't answer one specific part of one second.
Number of, I think it was
Yeah, number of sprints.
number
Yes,
of
Dinesh.
sprints. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So Dinesh, there's okay. So yeah, thanks for mentioning a very practical scenario. So effort, Dinesh, is nothing but the number of weeks. Okay. So when we say effort, like the man hours, right? So how many resources we need? Let's say we have 4 resources, and then how many weeks of every resource we need to accomplish the task, right? So effort usually translates to a number, which is number of days or number of weeks, right? And based on the number of weeks, for example, we arrive at 8 weeks, right? And then uh, we do reverse engineering and we break it down to 4 sprints because it's 8 weeks. So our goal, it's not about how do we decide the number of sprints. Our focus should only be on what is the effort it takes, and number of sprints is just a result of the effort it takes. If it takes 12 weeks, then it takes maybe like 6 sprints. If it takes 14 weeks, it takes 8 sprints. Is this what you exactly asked?
Yeah. Yeah. Somehow
Yeah.
because
Yeah, so we won't go to the customer, or we won't go to a stakeholder, or anyone saying that, hey, we'll do this in 8 weeks, or we'll do this in we'll do this in 2 sprints, or we'll do this in 3 sprints.
Mhm.
As a PM, our question or our focus should always be on, like, how much time will this take. So we should have a bunch of questions which has to be answered either by us or the engineering manager or whoever it is. Like, how complex is the work? How much time will this take? What are the team's technical abilities? Is my team technically capable enough right now to achieve this? What are the risks? What are the risks right now? And what are the parts of the project we are unsure about, maybe with respect to requirements, for example. And what must be in place before the team can start? Like, is there any blocker right now before we even get started? And maybe what are the things which can possibly go wrong? So if we address all these questions, right, then typically you will arrive at a timeline. Okay, this will take 3 months. These are the risks, these are the resources that are needed, and these are the gaps, and these are the blockers. Maybe before we start, I need to be very clear about the requirements document and the QA acceptance criteria, blah blah blah. And then you can reverse engineer and then break it down to sprints. Is this clear?
thank you so much, sir.
Yeah. Yeah. One more thing, guys. So agile actually, like whenever you do some reading also, don't focus a lot on the theoretical aspects. Like it's great if you know the philosophies and the theories, and if you want to do a scrum master certification, all that, but strictly from a practical point of view, all we need in the real world, and this is in startups or big organizations, like right now the company where I work, I don't do any agile right now. There is the engineering manager who's doing it. Like sometimes we are not even responsible for all these things, but sometimes we are. It depends on the organization, right? But even if we are, all we need to know is the terminology and the best practices. And most of the times it's about being very flexible, because uh, it's very difficult, and in fact highly impossible, to follow all these things like a textbook, like a hard and fast process, right? And in fact in interviews, whenever you answer like these kind of questions also, it's very important to sometimes mention this caveat that, okay, this is the process which my organization follows. However, I'm not entirely rigid about the process, so what are the processes you guys follow? You can always bounce a question like that and then understand what they follow and where they are and all that, because we should, as a PM, whether it is agile or whether it is design or whether it is something else, we should never come across as someone who's a stickler to process, who's very rigid about process, because product management is more about being very fluid and being very flexible, and it varies from project to project and organization to organization. So this is one note, you know so yeah. And most of the agile stuff is something like we will learn on the go, like when we work on projects. That is also one of the main that is also one of the main characteristics of this. Like unlike other aspects of product management, agile is something which is very very experience based. Like I'm able to answer a lot of your questions because I've worked in those environments before. Otherwise, like strictly from a theoretical standpoint, it's very difficult to answer these questions.